Every time you book a flight for a weekend getaway, you probably feel it, right? That little twinge of guilt. You sit there looking at the checkout screen wondering, are you acting as an economic savior, pumping lifeblood into a local economy, or are you just a straight-up environmental villain digging a grave for the planet?
Oh, yeah. I mean, everyone feels that. We've been told for years that a thriving tourism industry and a healthy environment are just completely incompatible.
Exactly. I mean, common sense tells us that more tourists flying in, renting cars, cranking the AC in their hotels, that absolutely must equal a massive spike in greenhouse gases. But today we are looking at a sweeping 22-year data study from the European Union that completely shatters that assumption. It is mathematically backwards.
It really is. The data we're looking at today reveals a truth that honestly feels like a glitch in the matrix.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are unpacking a massive investigation by two world-class economists, Jung Hwan Lee from Boston University and Tantutape Brahmasrien from Purdue University. And our mission today is to figure out how millions of extra tourists could somehow be lowering carbon emissions.
Right, because when you first hear that, it sounds like an absolute joke.
Totally. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we even look at the numbers, we really need to understand why elite financial scholars are suddenly so obsessed with our vacation habits. I mean, Lee specializes in environmental economics, and Brahmasrien is a Fulbright scholar focusing on international finance. They aren't exactly travel bloggers.
No, definitely not. For them, this isn't about raiding airport security or finding the best beach resorts. This is about the survival logic of modern human civilization.
Survival logic. That is a heavy phrase.
But it's accurate, you know? We are at this terrifying tipping point globally. Governments are trapped in this brutal dilemma where they have to maintain healthy economic growth to feed their people, but if they grow too much, they literally boil the oceans.
Right, the classic growth versus climate collision.
Exactly. So these researchers published this massive study in the highly prestigious journal Tourism Management because they are treating tourism as the ultimate test case. They want to see if humanity can actually decouple wealth generation from environmental destruction.
And what they found is going to sound completely nuts to anyone who has ever seen the smog hanging over a busy international airport.
Oh, for sure.
So let me hit you with the ultimate counterintuitive bomb here. If I told you that the more tourists flood into a country, the lower its carbon emissions might go, you'd think I was crazy, right?
I mean, I would absolutely ask to see the math on that.
Right. Because the common sense argument is so ingrained in us. Tourism relies heavily on fossil fuels. Planes, trains, automobiles. It has to increase CO2. But here is the face slap fact from the researchers. Between 1988 and 2009, as tourism in the EU absolutely exploded, the average per capita CO2 emissions didn't rise. They actually dropped.
Dropped significantly, too.
Yeah, they went from 8.83 metric tons per person down to 7.22 metric tons.
Which is wild when you consider the overall wealth of the region was growing at the exact same time.
Wait, that's like saying eating more double cheeseburgers makes you lose weight. How is that physically possible?
Well, what's fascinating here is that to prove this wasn't just some weird fluke or a temporary recession, they couldn't just look at a couple of countries for a few years. They had to put the entire European Union under a microscope.
Yeah, this was not a small sample size. This was a 22-year time-traveling investigation across 27 sovereign nations. And the inequalities they uncovered right out of the gate are staggering.
The scope of the laboratory is what makes this so robust. They locked onto 4 key metrics from 1988 to 2009. They tracked GDP per capita, international tourism receipts, which is basically the hard cash foreign tourists bring in foreign direct investment, and of course, carbon emissions.
And when you look at the baseline averages, it paints a very specific picture of Europe at that time. Average GDP was around $19,108, and tourism contributed about 2.83% to the economy. But those averages hide this extreme, almost unbelievable gap between the countries.
Oh, massive gaps. It wasn't a uniform block at all.
Right. I mean, look at Luxembourg. During this period, Luxembourg was emitting a massive 22.71 metric tons of CO2 per capita. But then you look at Latvia, and they were only emitting 3.5 tons. That is a 6 times difference.
Exactly. And comparing countries with such vastly different realities like a hyper-wealthy hub like Luxembourg versus a post-Soviet economy like Latvia, alongside massive tourist magnets like France, that creates the perfect petri dish.
A petri dish to see exactly what creates wealth versus what creates pollution.
Right. It isolates the variables beautifully.
But before we can solve the mystery of these dropping emissions, we really have to look the true villain in the eye. because the EU's average carbon emission is still 8.58 metric tons per person overall. We talk endlessly about going green, but why does the total volume of emissions still have so much terrifying momentum?
It all comes down to the burning of fossil fuels. It is the heavy, inescapable anchor of our entire economic system.
The researchers point out that in 2008 alone, the EU's total CO2 emissions hit an unbelievable 712 million metric tons.
And 28.1% of that was driven purely by gas fuels. The biggest culprits pushing those numbers up are the heavyweights, the UK, Italy, France, and Spain.
Which perfectly illustrates that agonizing dilemma we talked about earlier. Environmental problems don't respect borders. Carbon pumped down Madrid heats up the air in Stockholm.
Right, so policymakers are making literal life-or-death choices here.
With the stakes being that high, the researchers couldn't just guess at the solution. They couldn't just say, oh, look, the lines on the graph moved, so tourism fixed it. They had to mathematically prove it.
Which is incredibly hard to do with economics.
Yeah, so how do we know this isn't just a massive coincidence? I mean, it's like how ice cream sales and shark attacks both go up in the summer, but eating a cone doesn't cause a shark to bite you. How did they prove cause and effect?
They used a very rigorous methodology, but we can break it down without getting bogged down in all the academic jargon. Basically, they ran stress tests on the data. First, they did something called unit root tests, which is just a fancy way of making sure the data isn't tricking them with random temporary noise.
So they strip away the fake correlations.
Exactly. Then they tested for what they call long-term equilibrium. Think of it like a person walking a dog on a really long leash through a park.
Okay, I like this analogy.
So a person wanders, the dog wanders, it looks random. But over a long enough time, you see, they never get further apart than the length of the leash. They are tethered together. The researchers mathematically proved that tourism, economic growth, foreign money, and carbon emissions are absolutely tethered.
So it's an undeniable dynamic balance. If one moves, the others are forced to respond.
Exactly. And they used fixed-effect models to freeze the unique quirks of each country, so they were only looking at the pure impact of these specific forces. The numbers are bulletproof.
So what does this all mean when they actually ran those bulletproof numbers? Well, the first major discovery they made proves that tourism is an absolute beast of an economic engine.
We really underestimate tourism. We think of it as just cheap souvenirs and, taking bus tours.
Right. But in the EU, it is a highly efficient economic steroid. It vastly outperforms traditional heavy industries. The data point here is insane. Every 1% increase in tourism receipts single-handedly drives a massive 0.498% increase in overall GDP.
Almost 0.5% of total economic growth from just a 1% bump in tourism. That is incredible leverage.
It is. How does an industry based on people taking a week off work generate that much power?
It's because of the spillover effect. Tourism doesn't just fund the hotel you sleep in. It forces money into every crack of the economy. It creates immediate jobs, it stockpiles hard foreign currency, and it generates massive amounts of tax revenue.
And it forces infrastructure to be built.
Exactly. You can't have millions of tourists without building huge airports, paving new roads, upgrading the internet grid. It ignites the entire economic ecosystem of a country.
It's an adrenaline shot. But, every engine produces exhaust. And this leads us to the darkest truth of the entire study. We have to look at what happens when a country just grows, purely economically.
The curse of growth. It is a terrifying baseline.
It really is. The researchers found that for every 1% increase in pure economic growth, just regular GDP carbon emissions rise by 0.199%.
It's the grim logic of consumption. Growth means more production. It means more shipping, more factories, more people buying things.
All of which demands energy. And right now, energy means burning carbon.
It does. It feels like this inescapable destiny for humanity.
Right. So we're trapped. If we want to cure poverty and grow the economy so people have better lives, we literally have to destroy the climate to do it.
That is exactly what the researchers assumed going in. They thought, well, tourism drives huge economic growth, therefore tourism must be a massive polluter.
But then they look specifically at the tourists. And this is where the story turns entirely upside down. This is the ultimate reversal of the whole deep dive.
The green tourists.
Yes. In the European Union, tourism isn't polluting the environment. It is actively saving it. The statistic is mind-bending. A 1% increase in tourism revenue actually reduces CO2 emissions by 0.105%.
It is the complete opposite of general economic growth.
It makes no sense at first. You have giant planes burning jet fuel, rental cars everywhere. How is this happening?
It's not magic. It's forced efficiency. Yeah. When a massive influx of tourism dollars hits a country, it allows, and frankly, it forces that destination to transition away from carbon-heavy economies.
Right, so instead of building a dirty steel mill, you build a high-end service economy.
Exactly. And within the tourism sector itself, the competition is fierce. Airlines and hotels operate on razor-thin margins. Fuel and electricity are their biggest costs.
So they use the massive profits from the tourism boom to buy newer, hyper-efficient planes. They fund optimized flight routing to save fuel.
They are forced by the market to be green to stay profitable.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because this green miracle didn't just happen because tourists are nice people or because the free market always solves everything, it happened because of an invisible hand operating right behind the scenes.
You're talking about policy.
Yeah, the power of ruthless policy. Carbon emissions don't just drop because we cross our fingers and pray for them to. The EU didn't leave this to chance.
They definitely didn't. In 2007, they launched the Agenda for a Sustainable and Competitive Tourism. And then they followed that up with a really strict framework in 2010.
And what did that actually do? Did they just ask everyone nicely to recycle?
No, they made the low-carbon transition the absolute core of their entire tourism strategy. They used the massive profits they were making to fund deep environmental awareness education.
For the locals and the tourists.
Right. They entirely changed the psychological landscape of travel in Europe. They made the green choice the easiest choice.
But government policy and education alone isn't enough. I mean, you can write all the laws you want, but you need staggering amounts of actual capital to physically change an economy's infrastructure. And that brings us to the most misunderstood force in global finance.
Foreign direct investment,
Yeah.
FDI.
Yes, the power of capital. Most people think foreign corporate investors are basically vampires.
The classic narrative, right? They
Yeah.
swoop into a country, suck out all the profits, and leave the locals to deal with the toxic waste.
Right, but in the EU, the exact opposite proved to be true. The researchers found that FDI actually acts as a massive carbon filter.
The data on this is wild. A 1% increase in FDI raises GDP by 0.083%, but simultaneously decreases CO2 emissions by 0.017%.
Wait, so it makes the country richer and actively scrubs the air cleaner at the exact same time? How? Why are these massive multinational corporations acting like environmentalists?
It's the dual miracle of modern FDI. Think about it. Foreign investors aren't showing up in Europe to build 19th century coal plants.
Right, they are building state-of-the-art facilities.
Exactly. They are bringing in cutting-edge, energy-efficient technologies and clean energy solutions. Not necessarily because they want to save the whales, but because in a strictly regulated EU market, energy waste is a massive financial liability.
They want to maximize their own long-term profits.
Yeah, so it's a total win-win for the host country. They get rich, and their air gets cleaner.
So we have these three massive forces pulling the environment in completely different directions. Let's put them on a scale and see who actually wins this precision game.
The high-stakes mathematical tug-of-war.
Exactly. Let me recap the scorecard clearly for you listening. The gray force, the baseline economy, adds 0.199% CO2 for every 1% of growth. But then we have the green forces. Tourism subtracts 0.105%, and FDI subtracts 0.017%.
So visualize this. The baseline economy is constantly, relentlessly dragging us toward a climate disaster.
But tourism and foreign investment are these powerful anchors pulling us back toward safety.
Right. And knowing this exact math changes everything about how a country should be built. It literally points directly to the future blueprint of nations.
Which brings us to the concept of green infrastructure. Because going green is a cute slogan, but the researchers make it clear it's completely useless unless you back it up with hard, cold cash and steel.
We aren't talking about planting a few trees in a city park here.
No, we are talking about completely overhauling the grid. Telecommunications, public utilities, massive transportation networks, the entire hospitality sector.
To maximize that tourism carbon reduction effect, governments have to use intense tax incentives.
Right, they have to introduce carbon footprint taxes, environmental maintenance taxes. They have to strictly regulate how tourists are allowed to behave and how hotels are allowed to operate.
Because without that hard infrastructure, emission reduction is just empty talk.
Okay, so this all sounds like a perfectly solved puzzle. The EU figured it out, tax the tourists, build the green grid, save the world. but there is a terrifying vulnerability hiding in the long-term data.
A really fragile balance.
Yeah, despite all the green miracles of tourism and foreign investment, we are actually losing the race.
The math is brutal when you look at the totals.
It is. The carbon added by general economic growth, that 0.199%, is still significantly larger than the carbon subtracted by tourism and FDI combined, which is only 0.122%.
The researchers are sounding a massive alarm with this. The green dividend is in constant danger of being totally swallowed alive by the monster of overall growth.
We have to run as fast as we possibly can just to stay in the exact same place.
Exactly. The balance between tourism, growth, and carbon is incredibly dynamic, but it is dangerously fragile.
So if a country gets impatient and prioritizes rapid, unchecked industrial growth, say they build a dozen new coal plants to get rich quick, the tiny green effort of their tourism sector is just instantly annihilated.
Poof. Gone. The smog rolls right back in.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for the modern world. We've seen that tourism is not the enemy of the environment. With the right policies, the right infrastructure, and the right investments, it is actually the most powerful engine we have to protect the Earth.
But that leaves us with a really profound open question.
Right. Because today, the entire globe is engaged in revenge travel. People are flying more than ever before to every corner of the planet.
So if the EU's model of tourism-driven emissions reduction is the absolute cure, are the rest of the world's governments actually ready to enforce the strict policies required?
It's a huge ask, and for you, the listener, the question is even more personal. Are you ready to pay the inevitably expensive green ticket for your next vacation? Because all those solar-powered airports and electric trains aren't free.
History won't repeat itself exactly like it did in Europe, but the logic of human survival will always echo.
The future of the tourism industry isn't just about where you'll spend your next summer. The choices we make and the policies we support will literally determine the quality of the air we breathe. Something to really think about the next time you hit confirm on a flight. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.